there were huge ranges of experience for both men and women, and we
Okay.
were trying to find within the data that we collected, how do we account for these ranges of difference, like this difference?
Mhm.
How do we begin to group this what accounts for all of these different kinds of experience? And gender alone was not going to do that.
Hmm.
And so, education and income and all these different things that we looked for, these did not account for people's different experiences with garments. We'd asked a battery of questions that were pretty similar to Temple recommend questions. And then Jessica came up with the great idea that we should create a belief index for each person, and we
Hmm.
did that. And what we realized is that basically there are finer grained ways to do this, but basically people who experienced doubt and people who didn't experience doubt had really different experiences with their garments and described different things. And then
Hmm.
when you combined that with gender, that what we came up with were four groups. And we, to try and neutralize language, because Mormonism loves its judgy language, worthy and unworthy, and we didn't, we don't like any of that. So
Sure.
we came up with the language of conforming believers and non-conforming believers. And then so we've got four different groups that we describe in our chapters. It's conforming men, conforming women, and non-conforming women.
It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I am excited for this episode. You might have heard them in other places, but you won't hear them like you hear them here today. Nancy Ross, Jessica Finnigan, and Larissa Kindred. We're talking Mormon garments, sacred and secret. Welcome, ladies. Great to have y'all here.
Thanks for having us.
I am looking forward to finding out about what made this project start. Nancy, did you say, ladies, we're getting the band back together and let's write about garments? Or how did this come about? Who would like to answer that question?
I'll go ahead and jump in, and I, we each have different stories with this.
Okay.
So once upon a time, in about 2013, 2014, Jessica and I had just finished surveying the Mormon feminist community, and that had gone well, and we were thinking about some additional projects and what that would look like.
Hmm.
We were both part of the Feminist Mormon Housewives Society Facebook page, which was a really big deal at that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And we noticed that some of the conversations that would run the longest into hundreds of comments
Yeah.
and be the most compelling were about garment experiences, garment questions. And it just seemed like everybody had that I was reading a lot in these comment threads that I just never heard before.
Hmm.
And it
Things
was
like what? Like what, Nancy?
people's difficult experiences with their garments, people's difficult experiences with temple recommend questions,
Hmm.
people's difficult experiences with garments and sex, garments and bodies, garments and family members, everybody having an opinion on their garments.
Sure.
And this was just opening up a world of the social experience of garments
Hmm.
that I had kind of sensed existed, but I'd never really heard people tell their stories.
Hmm.
And then I had at that time some growing faith questions, and I was just feeling like my garments were really uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And I was having a hard time as like really understanding that because I knew that they were a little bit physically uncomfortable for me, but I couldn't, but it felt like more than that at the
Hmm.
same time. And Jessica and I kind of arrived at this idea that we might survey the community, and not just the Mormon feminist community, but men and women in social media, to try and find out, like, what are other people experiencing with their garments, and are our experiences unusual, or are they really typical? I mean, that's kind of the gist of
Hmm.
what our personal questions, and then our research questions were like, well, our kind of rough and dirty hypothesis here is that men and women experience their garments in really different ways. And you know what? I bet men don't really have problems with their garments, but I bet a
Sure.
lot of women have problems with their garments. But like, we wanted to understand more of this. We were hoping to maybe get 500 survey responses, write a journal article, and move on with our lives. And that
Hmm.
is not what happened. So, Jessica, do you want to like pick up from there?
Yeah, so we designed a survey, very long survey, and so we weren't sure how many people were actually going to answer. Our hope was to get around 500 responses,
Hmm.
and within a week we had over 4,500 responses.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And so at that point, we did shut down the survey. We thought we were going to run it for a month or so,
Yeah.
6 weeks. And then we shut down the survey and then started combing through all of the data that we got. And we left a lot of room for people to just share their stories in open response paragraph format. And we received so much data, just people sharing their stories, their experiences. And we had so much data, we realized it wouldn't fit into any journal articles. And so we started writing this book.
It's interesting to note for people who, here in 2026, where pictures of garments are shared on the church's website and influencers, and I'm sure we'll get into that, where it's like, look what I can wear with my, like that is very much what today is. But back in that time, I don't think that there had ever been a survey about that. And these conversations of like, how do you wear it? I think it was mostly like with either the temple president or the temple matron, where you'd be like, hey, I just need to ask you real quick. Should I be wearing this with underwear over or under? I hope I can ask that. And we just sort of tuck away from that. So although it's only, a decade and some change away, the information, the conversation around garments is wholly different than when you guys first let out to do that. So how did Larissa get involved in this whole thing then?
Yeah, I came in kind of relatively recently. So I actually was my undergrad is in gender and sexuality studies, and at the time I was doing a big project looking at Islamophobia in the United States, and so I was reading a lot of research about Muslim women who veil, wear hijab, and some of their experiences. And I was like, ooh, like this is so similar to the experiences of LDS women. And at the same time, this woman in Iran was murdered by the police when
Mm,
she was in police custody, and she had been detained because she wasn't wearing hijab in the prescribed way.
mm,
And so, at that time, like the protests broke out, they're still going on right now. And so it was just, I was like, this is so culturally, like globally relevant, is like, how do people engage with their religious clothing? And I just kept thinking of like my upbringing and my experience for when I wore garments, and how LDS women really don't like participate in like a global conversation about like how we engage with religious clothing. And so anyway, so I ended up in like a research situation where I was developing my own research project. I'm in the psychology field, so mine's slightly different, but has a lot of crossover with Nancy and Jessica's.
mhm,
Mine really looks at how religious clothing impacts body image and then our relationship with our sexuality. And so
mm.
that was kind of the focus of mine. And my survey was kind of a similar experience. I put it out for mine was out for 2 weeks, and I had over 8,000 responses. So I
Oh,
think it was on
geez.
the same trajectory. And again, like there was places to write more comments, and people were just like spilling their guts in the comments. And I think that really speaks to like people not having a place to really like talk and discuss these. And so, women and men have taken to online spaces because
Mm,
there isn't really a formal place to really discuss your experiences within a church institutional setting. Anyway, and so I had all this data, and then I presented it at the Sunstone conference that summer, and Nancy was there when I was presenting, and so we met each other, and they had kind of had this book project that was kind of had evolved over time,
mhm.
and so we just there was so much that we had in common with the way that we were seeing things and understanding the experience, and really like this how garments function socially within the LDS community. And so, so they brought me in, and then we kind of like flushed out kind of like what the final project is.
It,
Yeah,
it, oh, go ahead.
I just want to say that after a decade of working on this, Jessica and I were kind of exhausted and we're like, we need some new energy.
Sure.
And it was so great seeing Larissa at Sunstone to present because it was very clear that she understood this in a similar way to which we understood our data.
Mhm.
And I just it just seemed like if we got a little new energy, and a little new like lifeblood, then I bet we could see this thing to through to the end. And that is absolutely what happened. And I'm so glad that Larissa was willing to join our project because here we are now, and the book is about to publish.
You know, it's fascinating to me when you say that, talking about like the conversation place to talk about garments. For a long time, it was, "Oh, we don't talk about that, right? You get them and you wear them, and hopefully you got some instruction when you wear them." But I think for most people, it was wear them all the time. It's fire insurance. His skin was burned except for where he wore it, like all of these things. And maybe we'll get into a little bit of that. But we would talk oftentimes in our Sunday schools or even our church meetings about the significance of the covenants that we would make that are symbolized within the garment, but we'd never be like, yeah, you may want cotton if you're getting rashes. There's never like the linger longer today. We're talking about fashion and industry standards and the fabrics that might affect you. And there's still, even in 2026, isn't that format unless you go online. Is there anything that the church as a body, as a structure, as a governance has said, we're doing a survey about garments, give us your feedback?
So the church has done some, so the Church Correlation Research Division,
Hmm.
it has periodically surveyed people about garments. I know that I maybe 15 years ago, a while back, have filled out some surveys for them, and
Hmm.
including one on garments. And it's always been the case that people could, I think there was always a card like at Beehive Clothing or a distribution center where you could, and maybe not in Deseret, but now I don't know if that's like, welcome, please give
Sure.
us some feedback. At about the time that Jessica and I were figuring out that we were going to do a survey, the church released a video. And it's remade and retooled this video a few times. So I think the video dates from the end of 2013 or the beginning of 2014, at the time in which we were deciding. And the video is aimed not at church members to kind of discuss garments within the community, but outside of the church. And it
Hmm.
discusses garments in relation to other kinds of like priestly vestments and nuns' habits. And in discussing this at this time, first we were floored because they do show unmarked garments in that video.
Hmm.
And at the same time, they also discuss garments as like priestly vestments. And I was on I helped organize with ordained women. And, I had never heard anyone within the church discuss their garments or that we were vested to become priests because that was exactly the thing we had advocated for
Sure.
and we were not supposed to be thinking in this way about women in priesthood. And so that was kind of wild to me because it seemed like the public messaging about garments didn't resonate at all with my experience and with in our conversations with Jessica's experience. And so like it was like, wow, the church has created some brand new messaging about garments to try and help destigmatize this in
Hmm.
the broader American landscape. And that is an important facet of garment history and an important element of garment history, which is that for a long time, garments have been part of the unusual elements or distinctive practices or the weirdness of Mormonism.
Hmm.
And this practice has changed significantly over the last 200 years. And in the 20th century, we argue, and then in the 21st century, we argue that garments become part of trying to make Mormons more normal and acceptable in mainstream American society by acting as a kind of religious technology that restrains the sexual behavior of adults. And so, and that is something that really both comes out of the history, comes out of our survey, and is part of why this project took such an awful long time to publish, to make meaning of, to fully understand, is that we just had to sit with a lot of people's really difficult experiences for a long time and to kind of suss out what it meant to Mormonism, what it meant in society was just this really hard, difficult, long, awful, self-reflective, devastating project that we kind of had to put down every once in a while and take breaks from because it just was so heavy.
Hmm. When we talk about history, I guess it's worth noting in the time of the prophet Joseph Smith, garments were around, though it was towards the latter part of his presidency. And then since then, have we always had them? I know they've shifted from being longer to shorter, and even shorter now with most recent announcements. But is that accurate? Someone give me a little history lesson on this.
So we have a chapter on garment history, which is
Uh-huh.
probably the longest history of garments that I have seen in a published format, where we're also interpreting the documents that around garment history. And so you're right, garments are instituted near the end of Joseph Smith's life. He's drawing on it's not just Freemasonry. He's
Hmm.
drawing on a whole bunch of contemporary currents in religion, in society, in beliefs around health, in Freemasonry, and he's drawing on these ideas and kind of creates garments. When garments are instituted, they are progressive underwear.
Mm-hmm.
They are really unique because there is no single piece underwear that exists at this time. And single piece, like Union suit style underwear, is not developed until later in the 19th century.
Like we
But
think
so
about like long johns in a winter movie, right? You're
yes,
talking about like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly that. Long johns in a winter movie do not exist at the
Hmm.
time in which Joseph Smith creates garments. So he's doing something kind of radical,
Hmm.
kind of unusual with this. And there isn't even a sense that he expected people to wear them day and night throughout our lives, which is part of the language of the contemporary practice of garments.
Hmm.
When Joseph Smith is murdered, he is not wearing his garments, and people make a lot of meaning of that. And then in the early Brigham Young years, that begins to change. And there is a sense that people need to wear them all the time, that they are very much about protection. So garments have existed for not from the early history of the church,
Hmm.
but from the lifetime of Joseph Smith through to the present, though their form has changed throughout time and the meaning of them has changed throughout time.
I think it's a good time for a break right here. Let's take a quick break. When we come back in the second block, we will pick it right back up with this conversation. Coming back. You know, the turning of another year makes me start to think about how I have not done one of these ads for Best DJ in Utah in over a year. I'm sorry, everyone, but it means business is good. It means you should hire Best DJ in Utah. Why, that's me. And I even have people that work for me, trained by me, affordable, and travel all over. Literally all over, going to Florida this year, for instance. And this year means 2026, not this year, which could have been several years in the past, like we've been doing. You can go to bestdjinutah.com, or you can go and find us on our Google business page. It's Best DJ in Utah. You will see that as of the recording of this, almost 700 five-star reviews. Find out what so many listeners of the Cultural Hall have already found out. I'm great at parties. I'm great in your ear holes, but I'm also great at parties. So find out if I'm available for your date. We can help you out. Weddings, baptisms, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, funerals. I'll do a funeral. Best DJ in Utah. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember that you can become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. You can go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall, where as little as $5 a month, you can be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out. There are 3 different levels you can be a part of: the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial. Join us there, won't you please? It's also a way for you to get early episodes as we make these recordings, and you get to see the video beforehand, and you can also have tangential conversations of like people's backdrops and stuff like that. That's what we do in the Patreon group. So ladies, let me ask you this. You sort of alluded to it. I would be curious as to the interaction of men versus women with the conversation around garments. Obviously, I am a dude in a sea of women in this call, and I have thought it curious and have wanted to do it. Would also be curious about this. I want to do a video like these influencer women where I'm like, this is what I wore before, and this is what I wear now, and it's no different. But I don't want to be diminutive towards women's experiences. I just think that it's like, I think that it's a sort of a non-issue for dudes so much. Why? I don't know that I have a question except for the 7 I asked along the way. What was the interaction between the women and the men as far as the response goes? And then maybe what was some things that surprised you from the interactions that you got from the various surveys that you guys were a part of?
I want to jump in, but we all have stuff
Great,
to
let's
say
do it.
here. And there is so much because again, we thought our initial hypothesis was that this is going to be fairly straightforward.
Hmm.
And what we did was when we were trying to find out in our data, we found, so We didn't get that. Nothing was that simple in our 4,500 responses. There were huge ranges of experience for both men and women, and we
Okay.
were trying to find within the data that we collected, how do we account for these ranges of difference, like this difference?
Mhm.
How do we begin to group this what accounts for all of these different kinds of experience? And gender alone was not going to do that.
Hmm.
And so one of the and education and income and all these different things that we looked for, these did not account for people's different experiences with garments. One of the things, we'd asked a battery of questions that were pretty similar to temple recommend questions. And then Jessica came up with the great idea that we should create a belief index for each person, and we
Hmm.
did that. And what we realized is that basically, while there are finer grained ways to do this, but basically, people who experienced doubt and people who didn't experience doubt had really different experiences with their garments and
Hmm.
described different things. And then
Hmm.
when you combined that with gender, that what we came up with were four groups. And we, to try and neutralize language, because Mormonism loves its judgy language of
Sure.
worthy and unworthy, and we didn't, we don't like any of that.
Sure.
So we came up with the language of conforming believers and non-conforming believers.
Okay.
And then, so we've got four different groups that we describe in our chapters: it's conforming men, conforming women, and non-conforming women. Broadly speaking, conforming men did not have a lot of challenges with their garments and didn't understand why other people had challenges with their garments.
Right.
Non-conforming men were really upset with the church and expressed a lot of psychological discomfort with the idea that the church was controlling their underwear and
Hmm.
that a lot of the relationships, the close relationships in their lives, relationships with their wives, with their family members, with their ward members, were all kind of contingent to some extent on being deemed as worthy and as like a strong adherent of the church as symbolized through the wearing of garments.
Hmm.
And that is something we did not expect. We did not expect a huge chunk of men to be like, this
Hmm.
is something that makes me really uncomfortable. And it mostly makes me like psychologically uncomfortable. Men are often seen as having a lot of power and understood as having a lot of power and authority, but they didn't have the power and authority to choose their own underwear.
Hmm.
And that was like a real source of deep discomfort. I'm gonna tag somebody else to kind of continue.
Jessica, you take it.
Okay, so going on from what Nancy said, so that was very surprising about the non-conforming men. I think another thing that was incredibly surprising to me in this data was how many women reported extreme medical issues as a result of their garments. In a way that men, we only had one man who ever reported a medical issue in regards to his garments, and that had come at after some very aggressive cancer treatment. But women were across the board reporting, just extreme medical situations that like I had never even considered. And they were asking their leaders for help. They, going back to your position about, or your point that like you could go into the temple maybe and ask the matron,
Hmm.
but they weren't getting help anywhere. They weren't getting help from their bishop. They were getting help from Beehive Clothing. Their doctors were telling them, you cannot wear these garments day and night. You're, on the verge of getting, cancer because these skin conditions are so severe, right? Like
Okay.
this is the precursor to horrible things that are happening to you. And there was just no relief for them. And those were maybe some of the most difficult stories to read.
Hmm.
And that was across belief groups. So it wasn't like, oh, just non-conforming women are complaining. It was women who scored at the top of, the conforming belief matrix were like, I love the symbolism of my garments. They are destroying my body. I don't know what to do. And just the psychological dance that they were trying to do to make sense of this practice and what their bodies were telling them needed to happen.
And I feel like that sort of cues up Larissa pretty well. So you see this sort of commitment within other faiths as well, right? I do this because it is my outward commitment, right? It's our outward commitment of our inward devotion, right? I'm doing the thing. And we see this and whether it be like you mentioned, the woman who was killed, there's various hate crimes that can occur because people are able to be identified wearing their garments, not wearing their garments, wearing their hijab or not, all of these different things. So you hear all this, you know all this, you experience all this, and then lay it over what you're sort of studying, what your research is about. Like, is it, well, do your best, like that, like in a way that seems so trite. That seems like there you would have to have more to add than that.
Yeah, I think, I think when we think about, I think the interesting thing about like men versus women is that there are some, like just like Nancy said, there are some general things that people experience
Hmm.
because garments are have to do with how we relate to our bodies. So men will go through that, women will go through that. But then you add this like really intense layer of complexity because women's bodies change so significantly over time, as far, and then you've got like menstruation, menopause, breastfeeding, pregnancy, childbirth, like all of those things make them very complex. And then also men's and women's style, styles are different. And so this is where it gives like a lot more, maybe like more intensity in that way. But like, like that we've said is that men can also experience this real like psychological struggle. And I think when we think about other religious groups that have like religious clothing, the studies like, Jewish women and Muslim women have both been extensively studied, Muslim women the most.
Hmm.
And one thing I find very, very interesting is that there are Muslim women who don't want to wear hijab or they don't want to veil, but many of them, there's many protective factors for them, so they feel like I don't have to worry about what I wear because I'm veiling, and so like I don't have to worry about what style is trendy. A lot of them say it helps them develop their identity because people, when they meet them, they know that I'm a Muslim woman. And so, like, they know what I'm all about. And
Hmm.
it helps me to identify other Muslims. And so, there's these, like, really, like, nice protective factors. And the thing that is so, so complex, I think, about LDS garments is that it is underwear. And so, like, not only do you not get that, within LDS culture, we know how to identify other garment wearers. We know where
Sure.
the lines are, and we know that like we can identify. Like, I don't think somebody can really be wearing their garments with that slit in that skirt,
Yeah.
but outside of Mormonism, like people wouldn't identify that.
Hmm.
And so it doesn't have this same sense of like this identifies me. This lets people know what I'm all about. And so you lose some of that like identity piece. But then the fact that it is underwear just makes it so outrageously complex, like more complex than I think it even needs to be. Like if this was a piece of religious clothing that was literally anything else,
Hmm.
I think it would be so wildly different. But because this acts as underwear, I almost just feel like the church like got themselves into like a pickle with this, and it's
Yeah.
just like I don't know what you guys are gonna do now because you chose this to be underwear. And so like now we have to talk about periods and we have to talk about breastfeeding. And yeah, and like the rashes and like is this breathable fabric? And so I think it's like there's a lot of crossover when we look at like other religious groups and how they relate and how they negotiate gender and identity with those. And but there's also something very distinct about that happens with the way that people relate to their LDS garments, and it's because their nature is underwear.
I like the idea of like the apostles are meeting and they're like, "Hey, yeah, guys, is there any way we can think about something maybe not underwear that can be the same meaning? Can we have this be something else? Let's go around the room. Ideas other than underwear." And they're like, "We're 200 years in. It's got to be underwear at this point. Let's just try and make it more comfortable for everyone." For some reason, that's as you were describing that situation, I liked the idea of like, "All right, all in favor of not underwear. Can we do not underwear? No, we're gonna have to do underwear. Let's figure it out."
Although I will say though, like one thing that we found, like looking through the history and the narratives, is I actually like I think that there's something that they want it to be underwear because it is tied to managing sexuality both before marriage and within marriage. And so, like like I don't think the leadership really is like, yeah, is this functional anymore? I think that there is a function that comes from it being underwear.
All right. Well, I want
Yeah.
to, I want to ask and follow up on that question, but I want to get your opinion from all three of you. So, like, how would it do something like that? Is it I'm not sexy and guys won't find me sexy if I'm wearing garments? Is it Any of all those things, I would love to hear briefly from each of you about that. Whoever wants to go first, dealer's choice.
I'm going to jump in. So I think that there are a number of different things that go into this answering this question.
Okay.
And I think the first one is that underwear, like, and again, this comes from like a fashion history of underwear perspective. Underwear has meaning. Underwear helps us construct gender in society.
Hmm.
Underwear means something about who we are and who we are in the world. Initially, garments are a sign of polygamy, right? So they're a sign of embracing a particular kind of sexual and family relationship, right?
Hmm.
Like which, and that is, so it's the inner, it's Joseph Smith's inner circle, the people who had engaged in polygamous sealings, right? Like who are wearing garments. It is a symbol of that. And then in the 20th century, the church ends up changing the messaging, and it's we're no longer associating, garments with polygamy in quite the same way, but
Hmm.
they become kind of repurposed for sexual purity. And as underwear, so initially they're progressive underwear,
Hmm.
but underwear moves on, right? Like in my lifetime, I feel like underwear styles, underwear fabrics have like changed so much from when I was a child, right? And in our, I imagine we are roughly all the same age-ish, and we have all seen lots of different underwear trends. But two-piece garments were not instituted and or announced until 1979.
Right.
Right. And so, I remember plenty of my parents wearing one-piece garments, and so like they lag by a long time, and so they can often feel old-fashioned for people, and they can feel very frumpy. They can also be very uncomfortable. Now, lots of people wear underwear, but there are a lot of choices in society. If you don't like this brand, you can try some different things. But there are a lot fewer options with garments. And so imagine wearing uncomfortable underwear forever, and that's just what you have to do to be a good person in your world. But if you find this uncomfortable, you have to find ways to turn those sensations off in your body, or to just for slash forever live with that discomfort. And so even if it's only a little discomfort or a little irritation, then you might, to a certain extent, need to turn off the sensations in your body. You might need to dissociate, or you might just feel continually overwhelmed, right? Like there are a lot of, right? Like that's a lot. And when you do that a lot, or then when you end up having this really complicated relationship with your body, which culturally and socially has to do with construction of gender and construction of sexuality and like our sense of self,
Hmm.
and you don't feel like that's your underwear helps to tell you that that's not a good relationship.
Hmm.
And again, some people do feel like this is a better relationship or an easier relationship. But, you're not going to be having a happy, healthy sex life if your norm is dissociating because your underwear is uncomfortable. And so there are all these, and then women struggle to feel sexy and to connect to sexual feelings. Men are often all over the survey told us they were turned off by their wives' garments because again, it's not because construction of sexuality is like more than just individual, right? Like trends in garment design follow men's underwear. They don't really follow women's underwear. And so men are kind of reporting, we probably have fewer kids because my wife doesn't look great in her garments.
Hmm.
And some men are also saying, I have a more difficult relationship or I have a harder time accessing my sexual feelings because of garments. But that's pretty widespread for women. And yeah,
Just to give Jessica and Larissa a
sorry.
chance
Yes,
to opt in on this,
yeah.
give me some other things, maybe things that Nancy didn't mention as far as that goes.
I think one thing that also came out in the data is the number of men across the belief spectrum who said that garments protected them from having extramarital affairs. They didn't give examples of that, like I was going to have an affair, didn't.
She
But that's
started to
very much
take
in
my
this.
shirt off, and when she saw my garments, we stopped. I mean, I say that sort of
I mean, that's
whatever, but
definitely in the broader conversation that
yeah.
you're allowed to have about garments in church culture, right? Like that
Hmm.
it's a protection from extramarital affairs. And women are really reporting that garments help me wear modest clothing. So there's this divide. Women aren't reporting, I didn't have an affair because I'm wearing garments, which I think would be even more shocking in, an extramarital affair. Like, I don't know if people outside the church would even notice men's garments as different, but women's garments are very different from the cultural norm. So I thought it was interesting that I think that cultural conversation around extramarital affairs really focuses on men. So it's interesting to see that data come across in the responses.
What about you, Larissa? Anything to add in on this?
No, I think there's a lot of like interesting pieces like that come out of the survey.
Hmm.
I know that there's like quite a few people that express that there's like anxiety about getting their garments back on right away after sex. And so like, because the instruction was to wear them, as much as you possibly can in day and night. And so there was like almost an anxiety that came about like with intimacy, and it's really when you say these things, you're kind of like, does anyone really think that? And then
Sure.
when you look at the survey, you're like, oh, actually a lot of people think that. So these narratives that sometimes we think we've like the church has moved on from certain narratives, like the idea of like physical protection.
Hmm.
When you read the survey data, you're like, no, these themes are alive and well. They're being well documented, that there's many people who have this idea of protection. But that was another thing that was really interesting that came out, is that there's also anxiety about like, I need to get these on as fast as I can, or is it okay for me to wear like sexy lingerie because I was, and if you came of age in the 80s and 90s, garments were very much tied to purity culture.
Sure.
And so, like that can add anxiety about like, is it okay for me to be sexy because I need to be modest, and modest is hottest. And so, like I need to make sure that like I've got myself covered. And so like there can be anxiety about like really accessing your sexuality. And anxiety is like the number one like desire killer, right? And
Yeah.
so like if you're kind of like, I'm not sure, is this okay? Is this right? Like I don't want to be inappropriate. I want to have
Hmm.
an appropriate sexual relationship. And then as soon as we're done, I need
Yep.
to like get those garments right back on. You can see how this like really adds a huge element in even like married like church approved relationships.
Right. I, for whatever reason too, I walk it out. It's like, well, that was fantastic. Hold on real quick. I'd love to cuddle with you. I'm just going to go ahead and get my garments back on. Just give me one sec. Ah, yes. Let's cuddle. Perfect. That
Yeah.
post.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Thank you.
the in
Oh,
the
good. What
afterglow.
if the
Yeah.
house burns down right after we've experienced one another? If I burn, uh, attitudes changing, I think are sort of, a huge part of this. Uh, and so I want to queue it up, and if you think maybe it's going to be a bit longer, maybe I queue up the question, and then we come back and we talk about it in the third block. But the two parts. One is modesty, the conversation around modesty in the church, and especially with the garments being, the smaller straps and the sleeveless, or however I don't know what the fashion word is, smaller than they used to be. I'm not a fashion person, right? That we're like, no, it's not an indicator of modesty. It's your covenants. We're changing as far as what modesty is and what it isn't. And then we also have sort of gotten rid of the folklore. Well, Joseph Smith didn't wear his garments and he was killed. So now we have to be protected. And we've sort of started to walk away from as I remember when I was going through the temple, the fire insurance, tithing and fire insurance garments of wearing those things. The attitudes are changing. So are we finally coming around to what probably Joseph Smith was like? Covenants. It's not about all the things. It's about the covenants. Or are we still in the wild wasteland of it means something more than covenants? Take that, someone.
I don't know. I don't know. We don't really know if Joseph Smith, if it was about covenants for Joseph Smith. That's undocumented. We don't know if it was just about polygamy. We don't, I
Mm.
mean, like it wasn't written about, and I'll let Nancy kind of like clarify that, but I don't think we even know what Joseph Smith fully meant.
So I think the best, and again, Joseph is drawing on a lot of different ideas. So
Sure.
I think that there are contemporary ideas about clothing and fashion reform and women's health and change different kinds of styles being more promotive of health. And I think Joseph ends up kind of taking that health idea and transforming it into this religious idea of protection. And
Hmm.
so there's a lot in the water, but ultimately only those who are wearing garments are those who are practicing polygamy. So garments are about polygamy, and nobody in this group is going to be like, yes, let's go back to that, like
Yeah.
that.
No. Yeah.
Let's resurrect that one.
Okay.
No, but they were about a lot of things to begin with. And so there are these things that have shifted and changed meaning, and they continue to change Meaning, a couple of general conferences ago, there was a new conversation that began that garments are really a symbol of the atonement. Garments hadn't been a symbol of the atonement until 2024, but now garments are a symbol of the atonement. As church leaders want to be like, no, but we just want to be a little bit more regular Christian mainstream, and so they have to take on more mainstream theological ideas and but garments, which are very distinctive. So I don't think that so they are always this thing in flux.
Hmm.
They come to really be about they come to be about because they're always about sexuality, right? Like polygamy is sexuality. Like they're
Okay.
always about sexuality. But in the 40s is when church leaders really begin to develop the language that sex is a thing, sex outside marriage is like carries the same moral weight as murder. And so that really emerges. It's the same time in which evangelicals are really heating up with their ideas about sexuality in American culture and wanting to really embrace restrained sexuality, not only for women, but also for men. And Mormonism jumps on that bandwagon, and in part with its own version. So sexuality is a sin next to murder from the 1940s onward.
Sure.
And then in the early 50s, church leaders are like, we're, very much, I think, in line with what evangelicals are also doing, is like, no, in order to make sure that men are sexually pure, we need our women to be more modest.
Yeah.
And so
I
we're
couldn't
going,
control my thoughts, ladies.
right,
You
right.
need to control them for me. Thank you.
Exactly. So women then, so drawing on this very evangelical idea of women of gatekeepers of men's sexuality. So if you want the men to be pure, then the women need to be sexless. And so as the church in the
Hmm.
post-war period tries to become closer to white evangelical, it's like white evangelical cousins. And we see that it kind of achieves some degree of arriving in the 80s with joining the moral majority. And it's often partnered with evangelicals on numerous social projects that it needs its women to be sexless. And so that's how you kind of achieve white even, an American ideal of womanhood to a certain extent
Hmm.
in the 20th century. And so it seeks to achieve that through modesty. So there's a new modesty discourse that is instigated by church leaders in the early 1950s. And then, very conveniently, the church already has this practice of garments. And so, by controlling the sleeve and the leg lengths of garments, the church can really easily enforce modesty in a way that, even its white evangelical cousins can't because they
Sure.
don't wear garments. And so, there is a sense then that that there wasn't quite the same sense of modesty, but that modesty then becomes a real part of the focus of teaching in the 1950s and onward, with different waves of like really holding to this and not. But garments absorb all of this modesty teaching because this is like the adult, after experiencing young women's in the 90s, I wear garments in the early to start wearing garments in the early 2000s. And it's like, this is the thing that enforces ongoing modesty. And so there's a sense in which, right, our modesty culture is not just for youth, it is for married women also. And so that's hard, right? Like that's maybe for some people it is an obvious connection because of their lived experience and others less so, but I'm going to stop talking now. So
Yeah.
somebody else jump in.
Jessica, I'll leave it to you to comment on that or any of the other stuff that said, then we'll take a break and we'll come back into the third block.
Let's see.
Anything
I
that,
think your question to the changing of the styles,
Mhm.
we outlined this in the book as well. Other stories of when there were large garment changes and the resistance or just the conflicting feelings of people who had worn the old styles, trying to reconcile what they had sacrificed versus what was now being asked of them to accept. I don't think we have a clear understanding of like how that process plays out, but the church does this a lot. Like, we will ask you to sacrifice, for doctrine, for theology, and then we will switch the policies without discussion, without any type of reckoning of like what you gave up. Like a lot of women, gave up their careers or stuff like that outside of
Sure.
garments, but
Sure.
then we change that discussion. But I think the sleeveless garments have similar effects. Like, is it not porn shoulders? Is it porn shoulders? What is that discussion? And I hope that because the church is being more open with influencers and just a broader discussion, that there is a process in this change for rectifying or reconciling that type of change. Because historically, from what we could gather from all of the archives, like there wasn't a reckoning. There was just, this is changed and this is not, especially in the early changes from the original style to a different style when polygamy becomes illegal. There's a lot of feelings that I don't think ever get resolved. And although the sleeve is slightly different, I do think it's a big change.
Let's take a break here. When we come back in the third block, there is a question we ask everyone who steps in the Cultural Hall. I'll ask that of you, ladies. Also, a couple other things as well. Maybe even a story. I've got a great story I can't wait to share with you guys. We'll come back and do that in the third block of the Cultural Hall. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, you know what? I could do a podcast. You should. Having a podcast has been one of the things that a lot of people have really sought out to do. Some just to see, can I even do this thing? I'm here to tell you that you can. And I have consulted lots of people to be able to do it. Now, some people, I consult them and they go, oh, this was way more than I ever thought it would be. And other people go, oh, you know what? A podcast isn't for me, but you helped me decide to do this thing. Whatever it is, maybe it will end up being a podcast, or maybe it'll just end up being that we have some great times together. You realize that it's time to do that in a different season of your life, or this season is now. You can reach out to me, contact@theculturalhall.com, and say podcast consultant, or my email address, Richie, R-I-C-H-I-E-T, Stedman @gmail.com. And be sure that you put podcast consultant in the subject line. Would love to talk to you and see if having a podcast would be the right thing for you. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember that you can always send us an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. That is the email address. If you're listening to this and you go, I don't agree with these ladies at all, you can certainly send that email along. We would love to hear that. If you have additional questions, I'm sure I can forward them along to them. And if we get enough of that kind of stuff, I bet we could get one, if not all of them, to come back if it warrants another episode. I know we're leaving so much on the table. They may not be willing to come back, but I would at least ask them to come back. Send us an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. Now, ladies, because we're talking about the garment experience, I have to tell you this. When I went to serve my mission in the Cleveland, Ohio mission, when I was going through the temple, I had the opportunity right on the tail end to buy a pair of one-piece garments. And I made a point to, every time I was with my brand new companion the first night, wear the one-piece garment and just not say anything about it. Like, it was just like, hey, new companion, great to have you. And as elders were wont to do, without any other thing, just be like, yeah, you know, this is what I wear. And without fail, every single one of them was like, what are you wearing? Oh, it's my garments. They come in two pieces now. And I, because of the kind of person that I am, would lean in and go, 2 pieces? Are you kidding? We can wear 2 pieces? And anyway, I figured you guys would appreciate that story. I need to know about this, the sociality of garments. Dear friend of mine, salesman, he is not a member of the church, lives in the Salt Lake Valley. He will intentionally wear a t-shirt with a different neck that is very obviously shown in like through his dress shirts. And so people, without, outwardly saying, they sort of have this nod of like, gentleman of the cloth, I'm a gentleman of the cloth too. And he could noticeably tell how he could seal the deal when he was wearing something like that, and how he wouldn't or even get a conversation were he not. That's a small part of this, but Larissa, maybe talk to me about the bigger social picture around the, we've said it out loud here a couple of times, the judgment that we are. There's no way she could be wearing that blouse. Oh, I bet she doesn't keep her covenants. Like, these horrible things that we do to one another and lay it into this very sacred thing of garments.
Yeah, so this is a theme that came out really, really strongly in the survey data, and so it's a very central piece, I think, of the book is this element of like social policing that happens within the culture, and it's around garments. And it's interesting because when we talk about garments, like we always say, like it's personal, right? This is a personal thing, but it's not really personal because of what you said. Like, you can see this, and then like there's always been narratives around garments that kind of differentiate like who's being righteous and who's not. You're supposed to be wearing them a certain way. Is it okay to take them off on vacation, or like, do I wear them to the gym or not? And so there has been a lot of like kind of like putting people in different like social strata depending on like how or when or how, devoutly they wear their garments. And so, what we find is that people actually have reported that it's the social policing
Hmm.
that is more like harmful and more upsetting than even the institutional policing. Like your bishop might ask you like every other year, and you can kind of say like, yeah, I think I generally wear them day and night, but they're maybe not going to get into it with you. But then you've got your mother-in-law who's like, tucking your bra in, like, oh, like this, you're moving your shirt. And
You're
so like,
bearing your testimony. We even have
right, yeah,
these phrases
yeah.
for it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think there's a full spectrum, right? Like some people like it might do it kind of just like, oh hey, yeah, like your G's are showing,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of judgment about this, and there's people in the survey that would even say like, I feel like I personally feel like it's okay to maybe not wear my garments on vacation, but my family would see that. And so I will never do that. Like if there's pictures, I won't do this. And so this social policing has really taken on a life of its own. And if you want to see this happen, just get in the comments of any of these influencers who are talking about garments. And it's a distinct pattern. It's very trackable, is that people will start judging, well, like, I don't think this is appropriate, and you shouldn't even be talking about this. And well, I think
Hmm.
young people these days, and so it's this like within the community, I think there's more judgment within the community than even like outsiders looking at garments as a practice. I think the judgment can be very, very insidious within the community.
It's a thing that to the point of this whole conversation, it makes us unique. And I feel like we are trying to be like, hey, we're not so weird. The Jewish people have this, you guys. Come on. It just happens to be underwear. The question that I want to ask each of you, because we could go on forever, but we're about at the hour mark, and there is a question I want to ask everyone that we step into the cultural hall. This is not that question. This is another question. Would we be better suited as a church without garments, period? Or question mark. Would we be better suited if there could be another token of taking on the covenant that is maybe more private, as we say that, that relationship with the temple and those covenants to be private? Would we be better suited as a church, as a religion, as an institution? Would we be better off without them? And I get to pick who goes first. Jessica, you get to go first, and then Nancy, and then Larissa will let you take the end of that.
I think with all religious practices, this is very complicated, but I
Hmm.
think it's also really important for people to understand if you wear garments or you don't wear garments. This is an incredibly demanding religious practice, maybe one of the most demanding religious practices in all of world religions. So just frame it like that. This is very difficult. A lot of the survey respondents, they had a lot of positive things to say about the meanings of their garments, a connection to the church, to their spouse, to their family, to their community, to the atonement, to protection, to all these things. And I think those need to be respected. But I think the practice of garments, because it is so demanding, needs to be open to conversation within the community. And what is the cost? More like fasting, like we use that example in the book
Hmm.
of this is also a very physically demanding process that we ask people to do every month. But we have clear expectations of what the body can do and what other certain people's bodies can do and other people's bodies can't. And because this is underwear, we need to be able to have those conversations with the church community and somehow bring that meaning in without all this negative side effects that we see.
Okay. I'll give you a pass. You didn't answer my question, but let's see if Nancy answers my question.
Can you, which part of the question do
So
you
I
want?
guess, do you think that we would be better suited if we could say, instead of, heretofore President Oaks comes out and says it's an armband, it's something that goes around your abdomen, it's something like that, right? It's a ring, it's a whatever the thing could be. If we moved away from underwear, would we be better off as a?
I think the real question there is better for who? Better for the
Hmm,
church institution,
yeah.
better for church members, better for certain subsets of church members. And like Jessica, I don't want to say that and I no longer identify as Mormon, right?
Hmm.
I did when we started and was wearing garments when we started this whole project, and but I don't want to be telling people to like not wear their garments or that they shouldn't or that this is bad for everyone because people need to be able to figure out their own religious practice on
Sure.
their own terms, and I think
Sure.
that that's really important. Um, but I think, and I think that garments have been tremendously effective for the church in achieving some of its aims in society, right?
Yeah.
Like if the church wants the, to overcome all the legacy of polygamy by helping make Mormons sexless, then garments are achieving that.
Hmm.
That garments are achieving those ends really well, but without a real accounting of what is the cost and what is the cost to individuals in their real lives, and then trying to mitigate or figure out how give people more tools to legitimately negotiate this practice in different ways. And I feel like, so I think that when we ask this question, like, who should we stop doing this? There are going to be people who are like, hell no, we should absolutely not stop doing this.
Right.
And
Right.
from the institution's perspective, no, they should probably not stop doing this. But there are many individuals who probably need to stop doing this for their physical and emotional well-being,
Yeah.
and they need flexibility
Right.
and not like big blanket statements. And so going back to what Jessica said, this idea of opening up conversation, more conversation around garments to create a better sense of like, well, this is a very physically, emotionally, spiritually demanding practice. So, and everybody experiences these things in different ways. So we need to create a lot more flexibility, but I feel like if we went to back down to the sacred armband, I
Hmm.
feel like we would just be as judgy
Yeah.
about that.
You got
So
the armband? Oh, he
right,
doesn't have the
right,
armband.
right.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
And now I feel bad that I picked on Jessica. It's not anything, Jessica. I just always like to be like, yeah, okay. Larissa, take it to the end. Would we be better off if we could find the remembrance of the covenant in some other way?
I mean, I agree with what Jessica and
Of course you
Nancy
do.
said,
How dare you? Come
but
on.
I'll throw this out, okay?
Okay.
So like it's not my job to tell LDS women how to I just like Jessica and Nancy, I want people to be able to engage and create meaning around their religious things. But I will say this, active LDS Larissa would have wanted one of two things. Number one, LDS Larissa would have loved an armband because
Hmm.
that's just a vibe. And the Sikh religion, they have like an iron armband, and that holds a lot of meaning, and it's made out of I'm pretty sure it's iron, but it has to be iron. And so like I was always like, man, that's cool. Like they got a cool one. And
Hmm.
then I've heard many people suggest like, could we tattoo the like sacred symbols? And I love a minimalist tattoo. And so I don't know, like that's what LDS Larissa would have been rooting for. But underneath all of that, like
Sure.
I want people to be able to engage in their religious symbols in a way that creates meaning and power for them.
There's a meme that came around a long time ago, and I'm going to try and lay it into this conversation. It's the classic sort of watercolor picture of the Savior, and he's hugging a child, and the little caption above it says something like, "I'm so glad you didn't drink coffee," and I always kind of chuckle at that, and it's significant for me to note that like when we get really in the weeds about some of these conversations, that like when I try and envision a savior, I'm sure that he's not like, I really wish you would have almost had sepsis and had sores all over your body to remind you of me. Like that just feels like, I'm like, wait a minute. And so many people, because it's easier if you say the church said so, so I'm either doing what the church says or I'm not. It's an easier faith practice to just be like, I do it or I don't do it, to instead stop and go, is this healthy for me? Is this benefiting me the way that I want to? Is, all that. So our time has expired, ladies, but there is one question that we ask everyone who steps into the cultural hall. I will not dictate who gets to answer this question first, but you will all answer it. My hope is that you'll all answer it. The question remains, what is your favorite part of your faith? However you interpret that question, what is your favorite part of your faith? Whoever wants to go.
I'm just ready and raring to go for
Let's
some
do it.
reason this afternoon, so I'm going to jump right in. And I would say that I still have like very much consider myself a person of faith. I am ordained in an ordained elder in the community of Christ, and so I would still say that faith is very important to me in my life. But when I think about, I want to say potluck.
Hmm.
And I think about like the best part of Mormonism. I grew up in Central Maine, and the best part of Mormonism and some of the warmest, like strong feelings that I can still connect back with today are thinking about, ward potlucks
Hmm.
in the Augusta Chapel building in Farmingdale, Maine. And so, and thinking about our community coming together, running around with my friends, sharing a meal, sharing fellowship, and being together in a community in a way that I felt a very strong sense of belonging. And potlucks are basically an ordinance in Community of Christ. That's like it's got a real Midwest vibe. And so so that is something that I continue to see as like a sacred gathering of people who are in community with each other, who are helping to everybody's contributing something and everybody gets to eat. And that sense of like community and inclusion. I just love a potluck, and I love the potlucks are an important part of my faith.
Perfect. I love it. All right. Jessica or Larissa, which one of you guys wants to go?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay, I would say I always describe myself like this, that I'm religious but not spiritual, so like the opposite of what everybody else says.
Hmm.
But I would say like in a community where you're able to share just knowledge is probably my favorite part of faith is that somebody has this expertise and you're sharing it because you're together and people who you would never meet in your day-to-day life because they're so different from you
Yeah.
that you get to be friends with because they're part of your community.
Yeah, beautifully said. All right, Larissa, you can't punt it to anyone else. The question comes to you. What is your
Yeah,
favorite part of your faith?
I was using them to buy me some time because I was like having a real thought about this. I think that I think there's two things that are I think are really core to me and how I like believe that this is what it's all about is number one is connection. I'm incredibly connection based. My work within like the field of psychology is based on connection and who we are as a person and how we relate to other people. So I think just like what, which I think is what Nancy and Jessica are about, like this, it's about connection, about
Sure.
real like vulnerability and connecting with people. So I would say that that for me is like a very core part of like my beliefs and my worldview. And then I think the other thing also is something that I talk about a lot with regards to garments is I believe in meaning making. I think human beings are meaning making, we're a meaning making species. And so I feel like I want everybody to be empowered, and this is what I want in my life is I want to create meaning around the things that I do so that it feels worthwhile and like it's doing something and that it's contributing to something greater. So I would say those are the two tenets that are very important to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it, you guys. A great conversation. Maybe not certainly not the end of conversation around garments, but it is the end of this conversation at this time. The name of the book is Mormon Garments, Sacred and Secret. A huge shout out to the folks over at University of Illinois Press for connecting us all together and making this possible. If you go to the link in the show notes, depending on whether it's this book out, pre-ordering, or after the fact ordering, you can find the link. It'll say, purchase this book. And then you can click on it and know that like 10 cents of every purchase goes to the three of these ladies to split in some way, because that's how books get published and go out to folks. I appreciate your time so much, you guys. We hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you are not healthy enough to listen this week, that you will be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, go Tar Heels. Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, The Tiger with a U, Debbie Wanless and Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and Latter Day 3D Studio. We'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row. We really gotta go on the Cultural Hall show.